Why did this animation look so smooth? Some were saying it felt like a different studio took over. Others theorized it was part of a new movie. And then the standard it's because they blew all the budget. Well, in reality, the reason it did look so good was because it was handled by a very popular but skilled freelance animator by the name of Takashi Kojima, who specializes particularly in character animation and just has a love for realism. He animated the ending of Mob Psycho, worked on One Piece, Attack on Titan, Fate Grand Order, and the GOAT, Space Dandy. He's been everywhere. The second reason is because Daima has a good schedule that allows good animators to actually do their thing and not be forced to put out unfinished work, unlike some other studios out there. And Toei in 2015 was super. But why was an animator sought after as much as him, even on Daima in the first place? Well, that comes down to a very important but underrated factor in animation: connections. Although it's not 100% confirmed, it is pretty likely he was brought on by the director Aya Komaki, a former series director on One Piece, and during the same time Kojima was also doing a lot of work on the Wano arc. At the same time, it is a possibility it could have been to do with Chikashi Kubota, another animator he's been friends with for a long time, and in Daima's first episode he also brought on other very talented freelance animators that also happen to be great at character animation, so it's possible. But what about the technical side? What about this feels different than usual? Well, it's no secret that Dragon Ball and much as shonen anime for decades has put their attention on fights. And so naturally that's where you'll find most of the animation highlights. And so for everything outside of that, it's pretty limited. If Bulma's angry, the arms might move back and forth on a loop. When they talk, they kind of rigidly move on screen. The only thing that continues to move is like the mouth and maybe a small blinking animation added in. Or if there's like a gag, the animation kind of snaps through a small amount of poses, then chucks some spit on a loop. The visual weight is expressed more so through interesting drawings and posing than actual animated movement, which is why Kojima's scene in Daima stands out straight away, because he pays careful attention to the physics of just about everything. Like from the first few seconds when the waitress lifts her head, the shoulders slowly move back, her pointy ears, since they're kinda long, subtly bounce around with the head. Switching back quickly to that One Piece scene with Nami, she lets out a little breath, then turns her head, but each of those two body movements happen separately, and it's fine, but what about when you combine them together? Well, you get something that feels more realistic. The neck and the upper body drag along with it. When Goku talks, it isn't a still drawing then a basic turn. The head and the body sways to the left first, then turns around. Even as Goku talks, the front hair bangs like kinda subtly move. It's a very natural approach to movement, but why is that in the first place? Well, because in real life, we never remain rigidly still, perfectly straight when we talk or interact with someone. Like here's some generic stock footage, nothing special, but notice for one how this dude on the left, as his head turns, his upper body slowly moves to one side. The guy on the right kind of sways a little side to side. There's a lot that goes on, and to capture all those nuances in animation is so hard, which again is what makes Kojima such an impressive animator. The Bulma cut though is my particular favorite. It's a great example of great visual comedy driven through grounded animation. He pulls Bulma's head back and the hand forward. The pupils, they shift size when she hears that it's a bug. Kojima also stretches the head to express the shock when she realizes what she's holding. The posing and expression sell the comedy further as well. The iris and pupils become even smaller again, and the general eye shape expands with like this strong curve, expressing her fear pretty well. Her left arm is also always kept close to her chest, and her shoulders arch upwards, making her feel kind of vulnerable. The awkward throw she does is also great, and just the way he animates her arm raising up to chuck it, but it's also the detail of how her eyes constantly track the bug after the throw, which adds to the comedy for me. Then the hunched over pose, it's great, good line of action, it does a nice job of expressing her bug anxiety, but also in a humorous way. And last but not least, the good attention to physics. It's a very loose movement. Like with the arms, they bounce down, then out, then down, and out for the throw. They're not glued in a fixed position. But Bulma's reaction to when she finds out about the instant cure for her skin problems is just as good and kind of the opposite in approach. First off, Kojima shakes her head back and forth to express the excitement. He expands the iris right out with a small animated shine flickering around her eyes, and applies animation fundamentals like squash and stretch to give that bounce to the motion. There's a strong charm to it. There's also a good sense of weight to objects as well, as seen when Bulma lifts up the barrel. Because it's a heavy object, she has to exert a bit of energy to lift it up, shooting up with her shoulders, but because of that momentum and the difference in weight and size, it keeps moving, but then gravity kicks in and pulls it down. Kojima also goes to the effort to make the bugs bounce out and around as Bulma bounces up and around. And even besides all that, these are just some pretty difficult angles to animate Dragon Ball characters in general, so hats off there. Overall, this whole scene is just filled with dozens of nuanced animation details, and it just gives so much life to these characters. It's also rare to see character animation get much attention by Dragon Ball fans. I was surprised to see the reception it got, but I think that just goes to show how great of an animator Kojima is. Anyways, that's all I had to say. Just wanted to touch on that small scene. Thank you for watching, and thank you to my patrons. Moro arc with Daima animation quality? Well, I'll probably be dead by the time that releases, but I live in hope. Yeah, so I said episode 8 would be my last Daima review, but when you have Toei go, hey, Mr. Onishi, one of our best animators, do you know how you did almost 5 minutes straight of like crazy action on Dragon Ball Super Broly? Yeah, can you kind of do that again, but for a TV episode? So yeah, I couldn't resist getting my animation yap in. Also, you guys showed so much love on the last one. I was like, nah, I got one more in me. I'll cover the last episode as a thank you and a fun surprise, but forget that. I'm doing this instead. I'm not waiting for that. So first up, lip syncing animation. That's cool. That's hard. Moving on, action. Now at first I was like, okay, this isn't the animation spectacle I was expecting. Why is the movement so sluggish? But then Takashi Morita jumps in. I've been sitting on this man, not physically, metaphorically, for ages now. I did a video on him about 2 years ago talking about that strange but very well animated Dragon Ball breakdancing animation he did, and have been wondering ever since, will he work on Dragon Ball again? Will a Soda ad be his legacy on Dragon Ball? And he did, on literally the next episode after I said I'd stop covering Daima. And this is what separates, I think, a good animator and an interesting one. In the first part, you can see when Dude blows his smoke. Look at the shape design, it's pretty standard in the way it's drawn. Then flick over to Morita and look at the design now. There's this thick to thin, it's all broken up. There's breaks and curves, there's actually variety. And then look at the Super Saiyan aura. I love this, it's very intense. A lot of the times in Dragon Ball, whether Z or Super, and well, just a few cuts earlier in this episode, aura is usually just on a basic loop. And look at the spacing between each drawing, kinda close. Then let's flick back to Morita's. You can see how far the distance is between each new keyframe, but also how different the shapes are for each one. There's more fluctuation, which equals intense, which equals cool. The debris is also a nice touch. I've talked a bit about this with Yutaka Nakamura. He breaks it up into layers, so level 1, level 2, then 3, covering the camera completely. Progressive intensity. And then there's the drawings. Very intense and off-model, in the best way. Lately, I've been doing some art studies of the old Z movies, trying to imagine what Daima's characters would look like in the style of that era. And one thing I've noticed is just how much animators like Minoru Maeda, Hisashi Iguchi, and Masaki Sato would love to detail all the little muscles around the eye socket, ears, eyebrows, and mouth. It's so good. Especially with older characters. Honestly, that's literally the only reason I ever drew Never. It gave me an excuse to like add all this hatching everywhere. But yeah, it really gave this rugged look which sort of was filtered out over time for a more cleaner and refined style in Z, which I certainly also have a soft spot for as well. But of course it remained for GT, Super, and even Daima, and that's why I'm a big fan of Morita's approach. Do is a pretty simple design facially, but he really brings out all these different facial muscles with the detailed line work around the eyes, the nose area, even with the lips just a little Big fan. Now for the choreography, it's kind of fun. Goku shoots a ki attack, Do punches it back, only for Goku to then kick it back in his face, and peak posing by Morita, like, hey, Do's a big fat blob, why not play around with his design? Then Goma arrives on the scene. The direction by Kazuya Kurosawa is pretty good here. Covering him in dark shadows with the red background creates a strong visual contrast, especially some of the later cuts animated by Nightberry when he goes to make the stage. The rich red background with Goma in the center reminds me a lot of Dragon Ball Z Movie 1 actually. These black and white shots look amazing as well. Now I'm going to be brief with this portion because I know the Onishi section later is going to keep me so busy, but it seems Isamu Takada does this part with Vegeta. He hasn't done really any action scenes so far on Daima, being put on a lot of scenes that are driven more by character animation, because I guess he's just very good at it, but he definitely knows his way around action as well. Like on paper, this isn't anything out there. Character punches and another flies back shooting ki attacks. But through interesting shape design, especially, it makes the scene much more impactful. Takada uses a lot of C curves with like small little wisps and aura particles trailing around. Smoke is also very curved with subtle jagged edges. No shading is added, it's a very flat design, but it makes for a very readable silhouette. This is a bit of a contrast, say, to Ken Otsuka. Yes, he's back, who likes to use a lot of straight lines for shapes. Very triangular. Reminds me a little actually of Ebisawa in a way, and are even simpler in their design again. Now, next animator of discussion, Shurichiro Manabe. He's a bit more traditional Dragon Ball in his approach. Speed lines layered over limbs for hits, the very jagged smears that are pretty much just small triangles around the outer edge, compared to say Onishi, who draws them big and in this kind of rounded way. But putting effects aside, what about his animation? Well, of course, his way of animating motion is in this snappy rhythm, and that works pretty well here, especially with the type of moves Goma has, kind of using some kind of telekinesis or I don't know, whatever to manipulate parts of the environment to block and send back at opponents. When Glorio and Shin come in, glad to see the writers actually included him in combat again, there's that quick snap as the rocks come down and get sent away. Then again, a quick cut of some arms shooting out, like, who the heck is this? You can only see a green hand properly for about 2 frames, a bit of surprise and suspense, but then you realize, oh, it's Do. And you see that again, there's the big long hold on Goma as they all come in, great bit of suspense. Then there's that snappy impact as everyone is taken out. The rocks appear for roughly about half a second each. It's actually quite literally the same thing I broke down in episode 8 with that contrast of slow to fast. And this is kinda what the start of the battle lacked with Do. There were definitely some interesting ideas as well from a choreography angle, but it's not done that well by the animator. Like Do's surprise attack from the ground. Cool idea, but it doesn't come off as a surprise because of how slow his arm moves up and then like the zoom in and out. Unpredictability is what makes for fun action. Now, I really have to talk about the direction and storyboard here. Actually, nah, I gotta talk about the animation as well, because man, talk about cool entrances. The long distance, low angle shot of Goma above everything, and the confidence expressed through the posing with his arms crossed. Nice detail as well with the light flare. Then the way the camera does this massive zoom out really gives some scale. Having him float there is another neat visual touch to make him look more imposing. Then if that wasn't enough aura build up, there's this big high angle shot that transitions into another low angle shot. And you know how I like talking about clear focal points, so let's break this one down. You have background elements like rocks and the outside part of the arena kind of like curving in, so it leads your eye right to him. There's also the break in the clouds, which also helps with contrast. I think if this was all red, it would kind of make him blend in, which is not what you want. Readability is the key here. But if that wasn't enough, there's a small rotation around Goku now. And I take off my hat to the animator, Hiromi Ishigami, and Takeo Ide for his corrections, which is the cherry on top. The frowning Goku expression is such a common one in Dragon Ball. Man, so few can actually like make it look really good, especially in the Super era. But Ide just nails it. I think it's the way he tilts it off to the side a bit and draws the actual lip shape instead of a straight line. But now with the build-up analyzed, it's time for the king of this episode. Honestly, the reason I'm even making this video, Ryo Onishi. I know it's a bit of a cliche thing to say, this is movie quality, but it literally is in more ways than one. You legit had the same combo you had on Broly of Kazuya Karasawa storyboarding and Onoshi animating several minutes of action. So let's analyze it. First cut. So this is an interesting approach. Goma sort of falls into the attack. I've noticed Onoshi kinda like swaying characters in the camera back and forth. Like when Goku goes in for the attack later, he brings him forward, then sort of falls back, then comes in again. Exact same thing with this cut of Broly as well. Shoots in, falls back, then zooms in again. On the technical side, he keeps those drawings fairly tight with the spacing, then 2 blobby smears, then starts to like spread the spacing out, brings it back a little for the zoom in, then widens it. Combined with the timing, it's what brings that smooth back and forth motion. And somehow he even makes rock animation look so smooth. Again, it's in part to just like how well he spaces stuff out. Very close and then just expands it at the last second. He also breaks the rocks into layers. It doesn't break off all at once. There's this progressive build up. And this is the part where I had flashbacks to Broly with, you know, characters moving around large 3D mountains, battling it out. Excellent. Also extra points for Onoshi taking into account Do and Ku's character. I feel like if the episode was under maybe a lesser skilled animator or director, they might have just had the two kind of punching the rocks away, but there's a blend here. Ku is locked in using key attacks, while Do's moveset is kind of playful, bouncing around and jumping through them. Then Goku and Crew come in and I know I'm being repetitive, but the way Onoshi animates Goku is so smooth. But the way every character is used is also really good. Like Goku launching in, but suddenly this massive rock wall blocks him off, only for the Tamagami to slice it up. It just adds to the excitement. A good amount of weight to the sword as well. For me, it's through the posing. The sword is angled down and held out, so the character's pushing up and out with his shoulder, dragging it through. If he perhaps used one hand or came down from the top, I don't think it would have the same effect. Now, another component of Onoshi's animation is effects. Like I was saying earlier, a lot of animators on Dragon Ball would use speed lines. However, Onoshi uses shapes to bring intensity to an action. You can see as Goma launches in, he draws these animated, blobby, transparent shapes, which also blows up into this circle effect. When Vegeta lands his kick, there's this thin line. And then when Goku launches in again, you got this group of them surrounding him, which also explodes. That then leads into this with Goku's hand covered in sparks, and the same with Goma. Such great build up to an equally great punch. I love the subtle realism as well, to have their fists sort of fall down and come back up for a split second. If you've ever seen someone being hit in slow motion, you'll notice the fist doesn't always remain rigid in place. Sometimes it can tilt down or off to the side. It's a pretty small detail, but definitely helps in giving that snap to the punch. And once again, he also brings in interesting effects. He's drawn in these massive thick black brushstrokes with this rough texture. Reminds me a little of Kosuke Kato, but it's kind of its own unique thing. Again, it's interesting how he portrays impact. It isn't just through shaking the camera as is so often done, and a perfectly fine approach of course. Onoshi certainly doesn't hold back on adding a bit of shake here and there, but it's rather how he animates all these shockwave effects launching out. Then these small star shapes just to finish it off. Now the next cut is some classic Z stuff. Massive craters and lightning bouncing all around. Love it. The camera zoom out as well really sells the scale perfectly. Anyways, it then comes to my favorite cut. And man, it's hard to break down because there's so much to point out. Onoshi has always been an animator that's excelled at character animation and action. And so when you combine the two together, you get this lively, fluid fusion that very few can pull off. And honestly, I'm half tempted just to leave the analysis there because I hate making long videos. But let's jump back to old Minabe. Get our Inspector Gadget binoculars on. So notice the posing in this scene. Both fists are closed, both legs are in the same bent position, and the hands remain closed for a decent time until the next cut. Or Kazuya Hisada, one of my favorites on Z. You can see for this cut he sticks to just the one pose for the launch-in. Nobuhiro Nagata, same thing. But then flick over to Onoshi and you can kind of see the difference. He's always changing the poses up. You can notice at the start both hands are open, the body sort of sways to the side first, then clenches his fist, this leg goes back as Goma launches forward, the other bends, and most animators would just have left it there. But he doesn't because this leg begins to fall forward and the left starts to extend out, Then his hand opens up and so does the other slowly after, with the leg positioning also changing up again, kind of like how it was before. One bent, one straight. Notice as well how each body part is moving separately to the other one, it's not all synced together. And what makes it all the more impressive is how he manages to add all this nuance and detail despite having 1,000,001 cuts of animation to do. And I don't want to come off as saying Minabe, Hisada or Nagata's approach is bad, that they should all animate like Onishi. Realism is the path everyone should take. Because what makes Japanese animation so fun to look at is the diversity in approaches, and limited animation can absolutely be powerful. I was watching Solo Leveling while writing this video, and I was reminded of the strength of the limited Kaneda skill style of animation. And of course a style both Minabe and Hisada lean heavily on. These comparisons are more so to illustrate how Onishi manages to still stand out so much despite the amount of very experienced professionals this episode is loaded with. Now getting back to the fight, I'm unsure if this was Onishi's own addition, but I'm a big fan of how everyone is included into this fight, and how well everything flows into the next bit of action. Juggling this many characters at once, while also trying to make the action readable, takes a lot of skill and experience. Like take the plan to eradicate the Saiyans OVA, which I broke down. Sorta similar in theory, you know, battle against a big giant dude, whole squad's there, but everything is broken up. Vegeta will go in by himself, get beat, Gohan and Goku go at it, get knocked out of the fight for a bit, then it's like okay, now it's Piccolo's turn, now he's knocked out, then three of them jump in together for a brief moment, but quickly get beat. So it's fun to see a bit of a break out of the usual formula. It goes from Goku, Vegeta and Piccolo going at him, then the Tamagami uses a distraction to do a sneak attack from behind, a blitz of impact frames, then knocks him back, Shin and Glorio come in, blast them away with another attack, Ku comes in, whacked out of frame, then Do tags in and wraps around him, keeps him tied down. Goku then uses this to launch in with a massive punch, blasting him through a few rocky mounds. The whole group then come all back together for the squad punch. Then if that wasn't enough, everyone charges up in this circle for one big collective attack, like that's how you do a group battle. But of course, it's also the execution which counts. So first up, love the spinning leg kick, great move. I always like it when animators add spins in Dragon Ball, but again, I'm struggling to put into words why it looks so nice. For one, like always, Onishi keeps the poses loose, he adds some nice bend to the arms, but he then holds the pose for a bit, then snaps out, switches to animating on ones, turns Goma into this bull shape for a frame, then a big smeary body, comes down, a very efficient and an interesting way to animate a spin, and when he blasts Glorio and Shin away, he then slowly moves out, tight spacing, holds the pose, then quickly widens it as he launches into another spin. It has a very distinct rhythm that is just so satisfying to watch. Moving forward to Goku, the camera sort of tracks back and forth. It isn't locked into a static position. That's also another big feature of Onishi's work in how he moves the camera around a scene. It's what makes that charge up look extra powerful, and it's just so bouncy and alive. And back to his effects, because I can't forget that. The way he lights up Goku's hand and aura is beautiful. He packs in some amazing impact frames. I've never really seen shapes designed like this, it's pretty unique, especially this one a bit later. Now, if I keep talking about every Onishi cut, I'll be here for eternity. So skipping forward a bit to the Super Saiyan 3 transformation. This will always be one of my favorite forms, I don't care what other YouTubers say. And once again, he's animating in a heap of difficult angles, pulling the camera around, their sketchy golden art, then an insanely detailed burst of effects to end it off. And on top of that, you've also got Katsuyoshi Nikatsu's corrections all over. The big blocky highlights are such a Toriyama thing, definitely ends it off with a bang. Overall, this is exactly the sort of animation I was hoping for Daima's climax, and as a dragon once said, plus a bit extra. I remember last week I was also so happy to see Onishi's name in the credits, but then a little let down when I realized he didn't have any action animation, and you know, I thought, oh, maybe that's it, but I would have never guessed this. Daima's definitely had some odd staffing decisions, but I think this is probably one of the best one they've ever made. And it makes me very curious if this is as to why we haven't seen Naotoshi Shida since episode 8, or Chikashi Kubota since the first episode. Maybe rather than having them spread out over multiple ones, they're just instead reserving them for specific very lengthy action scenes in this final stretch of episodes? Guess we'll have to wait and see. So anyways, that's my final note. After all that, I still don't feel like I've done it complete justice. It felt like every time I thought the fight was about to end, it just like kept leveling up. But yeah, with that, thank you for watching. Thank you to my patrons. Check out sponsor Anime Swag. Use this code.
Hey, vacation next week, Lisa. 5 days. It's nice.
Bottom the next. I think us fans can sometimes forget how inconsistent it could be. Then Super, it takes inconsistency to the extreme. Instead of episode by episode, the quality fluctuates more so scene by scene. But then on the opposite end, you have the OG Dragon Ball and Daima. With Dragon Ball, there isn't really any standout Hall of Fame bad episodes in this area compared to the other two. Like we never reach Alien Head Vegeta or Fat Frieza tier. Like there is episode 63 handled by the infamous Yukio Ebisawa. Some very amateur choreography and animation, not the most original guy. And the drawings are, you know, just whatever, but like that's 1 out of 100 episodes. And Daima, whether you like the character designs or not, it's also a very on-model and well-animated show. There are no massive quality dips, even comparable to Super or Z. But then there's Dragon Ball GT. It never reaches the highs of Z, Super, Dragon Ball, or Daima, but it never falls to the lows of Super or Z either. I mean, its drawing quality on average is better than both. There's stacks of beautiful art from this show. Heck, I even own some of it. This one's my particular favorite. But of course, animation by definition is about creating the illusion of movement, and good animation is determined by how well you do that, as well as how it applies to general animation fundamentals, not necessarily how detailed or even good a still drawing is. For example, take this animation from 2008. There's strong directional force in how she leads with her shoulder, then when she lands, all the weight in the upper body comes down. You can see how the animator stretches then compresses it. The physics to the hair are also realistic. You can see it flaps up and around when she spins, then down, which comes under the animation fundamental of overlap and follow through. This is detailed animation. Or this one, look, it's just like a ball for the head and hands, but I would also describe this as very good and detailed animation. It's a lively run cycle. And so when I say GT never reaches the highs of OG Dragon Ball or Super, that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about animation quality. Because I have seen when people critique GT's animation, they're like, what are you talking about? It had the best animation in the franchise. So yeah, thought I'd add some context. But yeah, I've said many times in my videos that in regards to actual animated movement, GT just wasn't that animated. Which is what makes it hard to pick a bad one, but more so a really good one. Like, besides not reaching the animation highs of past Dragon Ball, it never really reaches that of other TV series either that were coming out around the mid to late 90s. Rurouni Kenshin, Trigun, Flame of Recca, the Street Fighter anime, Hunter x Hunter, Cowboy Bebop, Ninku, Vira Buster, Surge, whatever, could go on all day. Looking back, it is kind of surprising with all the superstar animation talent that was floating around in the 90s, none of it really made it to GT. Well, at least the movies had some better luck on occasion. But yeah, like with the Super one, that was a breeze, man, but I'm on Struggle Street this time around, so I went to my community and asked you guys what you thought. Twitter, that left me with silence, mostly. There were more retweets and comments about Uchiyama than the actual question, but the YouTube side gave me a few hundred suggestions, And the most common one was Baby Gohan vs Vegeta, episode 27, and Baby vs Goku, episode 35. Now the worst episode? Some may expect me to pick the Weird Cell one, some even recommended it. But that one, it does have some genuinely nice and expressive art scattered around it, and some alright animation. Episode 29, however, this is going to be a fun one. So GT episode 29 is definitely the low point in an otherwise good looking series. And I'm sure long-term viewers have already recognized this art style and gone, "Oh, that's Masayuki Uchiyama. That's why this sucks." But for first-time viewers who are like, "What's a Uchiyama?" Masayuki Uchiyama, next to another animator, Yukio Ebisawa, are the most disliked animators and animation directors on Dragon Ball Z. And well, we are about to get to why. So the episode title is This Is Awful, which I think is semi-appropriate, and Super Saiyan 3 is defeated, which is also true in a sense. There is no greater disrespect to this form than to be drawn like this. It reminds me of the Fonk remix of Not Like Us, in the sense that it's so bad, it winds around into an insult, and disses the song in a more efficient way than Drake ever could. That's what Uchiyama is doing here. Now it seems Uchiyama's student, animator Taichiro Ohara, is actually the one who does the animation at the start. Thank goodness, because he feels like the only one holding things together in the duct tape smacked onto your bumper type of hold on. And I say that because he was an interesting animator. While some of his drawings look fine, he also had some very strange proportions and anatomical structure to his art. For example, he's behind the famously ugly Super Vegeta image. However, one thing he had going for him was his style of shading, which gave far more depth to his art than Uchiyama's. It's actually a very distinctive shading style compared to pretty much every other animator on Z, especially when it came to shiny surfaces. I mean, no one could render Frieza's head as good as him. Thumbs up for Cell as well, which actually has its own name for it, Wakame Shadows. That roughly translates to seaweed shadows, because the shadow shapes are similar to seaweed, I guess. It's a style of shading that became pretty popular in the 80s, developed mainly by Masahito Yamashita, who was a student of Yoshinori Kaneda, one of Japan's most influential animators, who was best friends with Masayuki Uchiyama, who Ohara learnt under. See, it's all connected. But as I said, Ohara's art was inconsistent. He has some good drawings, he has some not so great drawings. And that was no different for GT. I mean, look at his take on Super Saiyan 4. At least it was better than Uchiyama's. Unfortunately, Uchiyama's corrections are likewise very hit and miss. Although this time they kind of hit more so than miss, and so the drawings in these first few minutes aren't the complete worst, but when he starts doing his own key animation, that changes. The artwork is especially flat and bland, but why is that? Well, let's slide his work next to the animation director of the last episode, Akira Inagami. So it's all in the structure. We got this big line here, we hit the brow line, we then come inwards. It's very clear. We come to the jaw, we cut in here. We can see that there's this clearly defined structure given to the face. With Uchiyama, there's barely any structure. There is no defined brow line. We go down the forehead and it just kind of comes around. We move to the jawline and it slightly curves around. It just lacks definition, and for an art style like Dragon Ball's, which is all about angular and defined face shapes, Uchiyama's style sticks out in all the wrong ways. Now back in early Dragon Ball, sure, the designs weren't as sharp, which did suit his style better, but even compared to that era, his line work still had more definition than here. I don't get it. And this brings me to a comment I've seen a few times in the fandom, that he's not necessarily a bad artist, his style just doesn't suit Dragon Ball, or at least by this point in the franchise. And there is some truth to that. His art in Get Backers or Fist of the North Star, it actually blends pretty well. But it's not just his style that feels out of place here, because there's just a lot of poor structure in general. Like, take the facial proportions. With the eyes for Inagami's, the left is slightly smaller than the right because the face is on a 3/4 view, so you'll want to compress that a bit, but they're still kinda around the same size. Uchiyama's though is super long for like no reason, way off. Shading placement is odd as well. Inagami, for example, takes into account the actual planes and various surfaces of the face. Like with the top of the eye socket, there is this small raised bit and it creates this very subtle gap, which is why this highlight doesn't come all the way down and points in. Then here, it follows and matches the shape of the eye socket. Now Uchiyama's, it's just like a straight path down, which is why I called his shading and his art style flat, because he does a very poor job, or at best, a mediocre one of giving volume to the face. Again, in another drawing of Goku, with Inagami's, the eye socket and cheek is very well defined. There's a nice arch to the eyes and brows through the line work. Then Uchiyama, it's pretty rigid and straight, even proportions. For GT Goku's head, it's short side to long jaw. Uchiyama, it's long head to small jaw. It looks off. Now it might seem I'm nitpicking just these two drawings, but I only say all that because everything I've described can be applied to all his art for this whole episode, and so it saves me from having to repeat the same points over and over again every time something looks off. Actually, forget just this episode, it's really the same thing throughout the entirety of his work on GT and a lot of Dragon Ball Z. And speaking of Z, funny enough, even when he's referencing shots from there, like 10 seconds later, he just misses the mark by a mile. I never even realized this was meant to be a Majin Vegeta reference until now, because it's so poorly executed. Respect the vision though. But moving on, Vegeta grabs Goku's arm and gives him a little speech. And yeah, flat shading and odd proportions. Nothing much else to say. But then the action finally starts, which gives me a chance to talk about the actual animation quality, because up to this point it's just been dialogue and stills, and yeah, it's just a 4-frame loop, not a whole lot to break down. But then animator Ohara is back out of nowhere. We have angular faces and depth to the art again. Appreciate it. The mouth is a little creepy. I think it's because he forgot to draw the teeth, but the movement, it's fine enough. But man, the posing is just very rigid and awkward. I talked a lot about this in the Daima breakdown for episode 2, that with posing you want to avoid using straights as much as possible, avoid twinning, and you know, you gotta add some bend to those limbs. Anyways, Vegeta charges up, and I'm a little hesitant to say this because I know I seem like the biggest GT hater alive right now. Don't worry, I have plenty of positivity for it in the second part, and GT of course has plenty of great character art outside Uchiyama supervised episodes. But man, Ohara's effects animation is pretty lackluster compared to his work on Z. Like, this guy used to pack a lot of detail in them. In general, Ohara was a great animator, pretty underrated in the grand scheme of things. He could execute some fairly detailed choreography while doing it with fluid motion and sometimes mixing background animation in. That takes a lot of skill. And you know what? He was very consistent at it. Doesn't matter if it's Dragon Ball Z or the original series. Definitely was the backbone of Dragon Ball Z's action animation. But with GT, there is not really a single notable scene or sequence that I can point to from him. But really though, this kind of started with the Buu arc of Z, which brings us to the elephant in the room. There were only 2 key animators behind this episode. For comparison, the previous one had 6, and the one after this one had 5, and the good one I'm going to review later had 8. For context, this episode's animation was outsourced to Studio Last House. These are not Toei animators if you didn't know. And back on Z, on average, the Last House team was made up of usually 4 animators, sometimes 3. However, a few of them would leave the studio. Tetsuya Saiki left after episode 105, and then one of the studio's stars, the legendary Naotoshi Shida, who's still around today, would leave Last House after 141. They both worked on Z still, just with different animation teams now, which left, you probably guessed it, just Uchiyama and Ohara. Obviously, that puts a massive strain on these two, which is why I'll never do the, man, the animators were so lazy when they animated this, because it couldn't be further from reality. There was a lot of energy poured in, even if those results didn't exactly show it on screen. But with double the workload now, Ohara wasn't able to put as much time into his action scenes as he once did. And as said before, Uchiyama's work was always flat, regardless of how big and great the team of animators under him was, so it just amplifies that even more. Now, coming back to this one, the next 3 minutes are pretty much just talking, so let's skip straight to the Super Saiyan 3 transformation. It is the first time this form appears in GT, and what a downgrade from its last appearance, which is saying something considering the last one was by Yukio Ebisawa. Although, I guess if we include the movies, it technically was Z Movie 13. But I mean, even compared to Naoki Tate's take a few episodes later, man, it blows this one out of the water. All we get here is a bunch of flashing lights, loop the hair, and boom, he's Super Saiyan 3. No cool spiky hair growing animation or anything. It definitely makes me appreciate Daima for making every time Goku transformed have impact. But what's strange is that this was directed by Mitsuo Hashimoto. He's the same guy behind the original transformation back in Z, was the episode director and storyboard artist for Gohan Super Saiyan 2 transformation as well, and also directed Z Movie 13, so not only did he craft some of my favorite episodes, but my favorite Z movie as well. So I'm definitely not criticizing this because I have a bias against the guy. Quite the opposite. I just really don't know what happened. I've seen another animation channel describe him as an inconsistent director, and that's probably the best description as to why this is just whatever. But somehow the art manages to get worse as Uchiyama animates this himself. I thought this was an in-between frame at first. The head has the shape of a potato, one eye is bigger than the other, the mouth is strange. I'm unsure if this was Uchiyama just like desperately rushing out a drawing as quick as possible, or bad Doga work. Unfortunately, the animation isn't any better, the actual punch has barely any weight behind it, and then it's just blocked out with the same reused animation of flashing lights from before. There's then some smoke, and just a still drawing of baby Vegeta after the punch. They don't even show the hit, which to be fair isn't always a bad thing, sometimes that works better. But at least animate the after effect or add some camera shake or speed lines or something. Just look at other animation teams on Dragon Ball Z. You can still deliver impact without having to animate that much. And the thing is, I wouldn't even say Uchiyama's necessarily a bad animator. I think his older stuff in the 70s was really fun and lively. He actually worked alongside Yoshiyuki Momose, a very influential name in early TV anime, and also an OG member of Studio Ghibli. Uchiyama wasn't some rando animator Toei gave a contract to because there was no one else for the job. And I went into great depth in an OG Dragon Ball breakdown not too long ago, talking about how well he improves the motion to one of his students' animation. So it's not that his corrections were always bad either, it's just for whatever reason, his work in the 90s is just a big drop off in quality. But back to this, I don't know how, but Vegeta somehow looks worse than before. Like, I know I said earlier Uchiyama's work lacked definition, but this is the prime example. But yeah, the rest of the fighting, like, after every single move they make, they narrate it. It's a live fight breakdown. Goku whacks Vegeta in the face, breakdown. Vegeta punches him back, they discuss the punch. Vegeta then dodges, and then they start talking about that. Like, I can't even put all the blame on Uchiyama at this point. This fight being so dry is also on the writing and storyboard at this point. But you can tell by the end of the first half, Uchiyama is done, man. He doesn't even animate the explosion, it's just like a big expanding ball of light. Poor guy. At least Ohara comes back after the ad break and is like, okay, you can rest now, I got this. And say what you will about his art, at least there is weight to the animation in regards to hits now. Goku also pulls out his famous biting attack, always good to see. I also like when Vegeta hits Goku with just like blasts of air. Cool move. And this is an example of very limited animation but still having impact. The heavy blur and camera shake give a lot of weight to it while not being that complex from a technical point of view. Uchiyama's corrections are still so strange though. I think it's because Dragon Ball usually has a very boxy rectangular mouth shape when a character yells, and this is sort of the opposite of that. But I don't get why he redraws Ohara's art to this extent. Like, as I've laid out, Uchiyama did not have a lot of time for these episodes already. He's on time attack. Yet, he still allocates so much time correcting Ohara. And yes, Ohara's art is rough around the edges. It's not like it didn't need it a lot of times, but Uchiyama's spending more time redrawing his art now than he ever did. For example, Uchiyama would always leave the shading alone in Ohara's art. It's how you can identify what he's animated on an episode fairly easily. But for some reason, starting in the Buu arc, Uchiyama starts to adjust even that and keeps it going into GT, which honestly downgrades the art for one, negative aura points, but saps more of his own time, which could have been used for refining his own animation. Anyways, back to this episode. Goku tells him he's strong. Baby, Vegeta is like, but wait, I've got more. His face melts. Episode 5, Beerus Tear, a true work of art. The crew join hands and start shaking. I do like how the finishing department accidentally painted Trunks' hair with his Z color palette, also his bandana. I thought that it was maybe an intentional lighting thing initially, but in the shots after, it returns to the dark purple, so I guess